Are you a farmer? Are you learning to be a farmer? Is it something that you've always wanted to do? Or?
Well, my grandfather was a farmer in Wisconsin. It's very good for one's mind, so I enjoy it. It's sort of a diversion. My main passion is my family and these goofy ass stocks and these crappy companies. But to unwind a little bit, I do this and I have fun with it.
Marc Cohodes is well known for his very public stance on Canada's Home Capital Group, a company he believes will eventually go to zero. In my recent conversation with him at his chicken farm in Sonoma County, Marc recounted his home capital story, as only he can. Amazingly, our conversation was so good, so varied, and so wide-ranging that what you're about to watch had to be left on the cutting room floor. Now think about that for a moment. If the home capital story didn't make it into the final cut of an interview with Marc Cohodes, you'll sure as hell want to see what did.
So there's few people who I really respect investment-wise. One is Steve Eisman, who is a pal. I like him. And he, I think, mentioned home cap at a Sohn conference. I don't know if it was 13, 14, or 15. He brought it up. And I paid it, I put it on its radar for me because I didn't really know about it then. And he was right, but they doubled the stock on him, which doesn't make them wrong.
Absolutely.
Just makes them early. It's happened to me more than I'd like to remember. So I was watching it because, again, I'm a huge fan of his. And the Canadian housing market was booming. And home cap, with insider selling, comes out and misses a quarter. And I'm thinking, fuck, how are these guys missing a quarter with the market booming so much? And I shorted the stock that day. It was down 3 or 4, low 50s. And that got me started on it. I didn't know at the time it was a fraud, but there was clearly something going on which caused them to miss. They had to come clean on $1.8 billion of mortgage fraud, first $900 million, then $1.8 billion. Stock then trades to the low 30s. Then did I realize that this thing was just a major fraud. I mean, Home Cap is a bank that should have failed. It's a fraud. It's a fraud on the public. It's an admitted fraud. They've still done a bunch of stuff they haven't fessed to. But in order to bail this thing out, the Canadian banks, the legitimate banks, wanted nothing to do with them. So the only way to solve this thing was with a Warren Buffett type figure, because the real banks and the finance people in the know in Canada wanted nothing to do with them. I know people who were in the meetings that the government ordered them to do things and everyone passed. And this bank was going to fail. So they go to Warren Buffett.
Well, let's leave Warren. I will come back to this, just because there are going to be people watching this that don't know the full story.
Right.
So I just want to go back to as home capital starts to buckle.
Yeah.
And the pressure's building. They've admitted to $900 billion of loan fraud. That got doubled to 1.8.
Yeah.
And at this point, your call on the stock is working.
Yeah, the call's working great. I mean, the stock's in the low to mid 20s. My cost in this thing is in the 50s or low 50s.
But the narrative is this thing's done, right?
Well, the thing's going downhill. Yeah. It doesn't get done. See, the weird deal is we're sailing along, and then all of a sudden the OSC charges Soloway, Martin Reed, and the finance guy. And then the stock goes from like the low to mid 20s to the high teens. And all the apologists keep apologizing for them. It's cheap, it's below book, this, that, or the other. But they still haven't come clean on anything. And I think it's getting worse. So the stock closes, I think, on a weekend or a Friday at like 17 or 18 or 19, something like that. Then all of a sudden they have a liquidity crisis and or a run on the bank.
Yeah.
That of course was blamed on the shorts, AKA me or this, that, or the other, right? But it's only because their finances are so fucked up. So they come out on a Monday or a Tuesday or Wednesday and said they have this emergency financing in place at some usury terms by some director of home and this pension fund. and it's highly dilutive. The company won't make money again, this, that, and the other. And the stock literally goes from like 17 to 6 or 5. And the bank was gonna fail.
Yeah, because I mean, this deal they did was the kind of deal you were only going to do if you're going out of business.
Right, and I think the guy, the fool on the board, gets on their version of CNBC and basically says it's DIP financing, and DIP, debtor in possession financing, essentially means you're broke.
Yeah.
So this thing's $5, $6, $7, and they're essentially tits up. And then came the socialist end around, home cap's too big to fail, it's a great Canadian institution, on and on and on and on. And our borrow rate in the stock went from 2, 3, 4, all of a sudden it miraculously went to 100 because they didn't want people shorting the stock. And people were writing op-eds, what a great company it is. No, it's not a great company, it's a fraud, right? The government should have issued preferreds, wound the thing down, said depositors will be safe, and make an example that if you do bad things, this is what happens to you. The shareholders should have been wiped, depositors made whole, mortgages go wherever.
Now, for people that don't know enough about this, I mean, everyone's familiar with JP Morgan and stuff because it's such a big deal. But for those of people who aren't familiar with Canadian banking sector, how systemically important is home capital?
It's not.
Right.
It's not. They make loans or liar loans to people who can't get loans elsewhere.
Right. Which is my point, because this is not a JP Morgan.
No,
when they talk about it being too big to fail.
I have OSFI stuff that indicates how bad it is. I haven't released any of it. I haven't let it go. I just want to see how this plays out a little more. They've gotten rid of the management, this, that, and the other, but they haven't cleaned up the problem that's home cap, right? I mean, I have these guys running loan loss provisions through SG&A to claim their loan loss provisions don't exist. And in the next Canadian credit cycle, which I think is at hand because now housing's going down, I think home cap's going to be the first bank to fail, clearly. But in the socialized bailout things, and I call them the kitten and rainbow crowd, Morneau and the powers that be have done Canada a huge disservice bailing out a fraud, which is what they ended up doing.
Yeah.
And they did it with none other than Warren Buffett. I mean, they didn't break out a BB gun or a handgun or a Magnum. I mean, they broke out the bazooka to try to do this. And he got a dilutive deal, and he's double collateralized in anything he lends to him, and he can do fine and I can do fine. But the ultimate question here is, what's the quid pro quo? Because he only has $200 million in this thing, which is like you and me carrying around 200.
Right, but he gave them what, $2 billion credit line? Is that right?
He gave them a line. He gave them a line, an emergency line, if they needed it, 9%.
Yeah.
And borrowing money at 9% to loan it at 4% is no way to run a railroad.
Right.
And not only is it 9%, it's double collateralized. So anyone would do that deal.
Sure.
And then he got stock at 10 with the book at 24. And he now has registration rights, so he can sell it if he wants. But it's a nothing deal for him, but I call it a loan shark deal, which clearly is what it is.
Look, fair play to him, right? I mean, he's got the capital and they need it. So
well, he has the capital, and the funny thing is he has the reputation. So let's just say it's the Warren Buffett Bank in Canada, but that didn't stop the last quarter's originations from being down 85%.
No, but it did send the stock from 6 to 22.
Yeah, 6 to 20 to 14, and now it's 16.
Yeah.
Because everyone thinks the worst is over. To me, the worst hasn't even begun, because they have the whole credit thing, and they took a negative loan loss provision in the quarter. I mean, it's a complete exercise in what I would call insanity. But this is a byproduct of what happens in an easy money environment where frauds get bailed out. And I can easily use the word fraud because home cap's admitted to fraud.
Right.
They as my lawyer said, you own the label.
Right.
So.
And that's not Dior. The fraud is not a label that's in demand.
Right. I mean, you own what you are, and that's what home cap is. And They still are, but, you know, again, I have no issue with Warren Buffett whatsoever. I wish the old man nothing but the best. I have great respect for him. But clearly the Canadian government needed to recruit someone outside of Canada because the Canadians themselves wanted nothing to do with it.
But so let's get to just relating this back to this art of short selling. You know, here you are, you have an initial bet that you've grown to feel more confident about as you've dug deeper and deeper into it. It's going your way, going really well your way. You know, most people would have covered it when it got down to 6. They'd have taken their money off the table and walked away and said, "Great, that was a profitable trade."
I'm not that smart.
Right, but how do you? Everything is pointing that you're right. Everything is pointing that this thing's going to 0.
Yeah.
How do you then deal with the fact that this agent out of nowhere comes in, they insert the Buffett, it completely screws you in the short term, it makes you look like you're wrong, it makes you look like everything you've said is nonsense. How do you deal with that mentally? How do you deal with it emotionally? And how do you regroup and reassess how the situation is?
That's a good question. Because the stock moves doesn't make me wrong. The fact that they needed him to bail this thing out actually shows how right I was /am.
Yeah.
The part of the question that's interesting is, so the stock's 50 to 30, and going back to my chat with Roland, and this is tremendously valuable for me, and I think for the people watching this. So Roland always keeps me grounded on some of these names. So he says at $30, he goes, you know, Mark, you've made 20 points in this thing. The stock's 30 down from 50. Why don't you take the chips off the table and move on? I said, no, the story hasn't played out. I'm actually doing more. And then there's this pause on the phone. And he says, you are? I said, yeah, this hasn't played out yet. So then bad news happens and the stock goes to 25. He goes, are you covering yet? I go, no. He goes, well, they'll try something. I said, maybe they do, right? And about 2 weeks later, they announced this Dutch tender, this buyback.
Yep.
And the stock goes 25 to 30, and then they do this Dutch tender at 37, right? I'm getting my ass killed on this bounce. And Roland saying, I told you to cover. I said, thank you. Thank you.
That's what I wanted to hear, yeah.
Yeah, just what I need from the likes of you. He goes, what do you think now? I said, I'm just laying in the weeds, letting them do whatever the hell they want. And when they do this Dutch tender, I'm going to take my bet. And if I don't triple it, I'm going to double it. I'm going to ante it in. Because after this stupid Dutch tender, then it's double, triple over.
Yeah.
He goes, okay. So they do the Dutch tender. I do a whole lot more, 37 or 36 or 35, wherever I did all the way down. And then the thing blows up. And then back in the 20s, Roland says, are you covering yet? I said, no, I'm not covering. I'm not covering because it hasn't played out. I mean, I covered some when it was in single digits, but I just covered back that trading stock that I did higher. But I'm still short a ton of this thing.
But this is exactly...
But along the way, he's checking me. And my thing is, when the world has everything I've been planned for in their stream of consciousness and everyone knows it and everyone's thinking of it, then I have no value add and I probably cover because I'm bored, right? Or everything I know is out there. But everything I know today is not out there in home. I still think it's going to fail. I still think they're doing wrong. I still think there's no way out. I still think the bank's going to close. I still think they got problems.